Hello and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review. I'm Hovik Manucharyan, together with Asbed Bedrossian, working to distill the week's news in Armenia for you. This show was recorded on November 14, 2022. Before we begin the show, we'd like to request that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe and rate our podcasts, which you can listen to wherever you get your podcasts. All our links are on our Linktree page, which we'll make sure you can find on our profile pages, so you can click on it and find us on all social media platforms. So if you like our shows, please share with your friends and follow us everywhere you're used to getting your Armenian news. Thanks, and on with the show. We were told we were winning, and all the retreats were only tactical. Yet something was off, whether it was RX's call to come and defend Shushi, or whether it was Aliyev's smug announcements, one after another, culminating with the announcement that Shushi had fallen. On November 9, 2020, the entire worldwide Armenian community was glued to the internet to make sense of the conflicting news about Shushi. Then, we heard from Pashinyan, who said that fights around Shushi are still continuing. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Then we saw an image of Samvel Babayan with a worried look standing alone outside the Prime Minister's office on Republic Square in Yerevan and not in Artsakh. And then, mere hours after Pashinyan's optimistic announcement, we heard that it was over. Shock, disbelief, disgust, grief, a roller coaster of negative emotions. For many Armenians, time has stopped and they're living one long, never-ending November 10. This week marked the second anniversary of the signing of the tripartite statement of November 10, 2020. Here are the major topics we'll touch on today. November 10 ceasefire. We'll talk with our guests in Yerevan and Stepanakert about their perceptions of where we are in terms of ceasing the fire 2 years later. And peace is dead, long live the peace. We'll talk about increased warlike rhetoric from Azerbaijan threatening Armenia, Russia, Iran, and anyone else who comes to Armenia's aid. With the pressure increasing and Aliyev's 2-month deadline approaching, we'll investigate the possibility of renewed war. To talk about these issues, we have with us Dr. Artur Khachikyan, who is an international relations expert from Stanford University specializing in interventions. He currently teaches at the Russian Armenian University in Yerevan. We'll also have a special guest from Stepanakert, ANC Representative Gev Iskajyan, who will give us his views and the views of Artsakhis on what November 10 means for them. Hang around until the end of the show for that segment. Hello and welcome, everyone. Hello, Arthur, and welcome back.
Hello, Arthur.
Hello, everybody. Pleasure to be back.
Arthur, basically this week was the 2-year anniversary of the statement of November 9 and 10. I don't even want to call it a ceasefire, but you currently live in Yerevan, and we want to understand what the date of November 9, 10, 2020 means to you, what the trilateral statement means to you, and any initial thoughts.
Well, for me, it was the first stage in our demise, in our capitulation. It wasn't really a peace treaty. There was no peace. It wasn't really a ceasefire because it was violated many, many times. It is violated as we speak. It did not bring us any peace. It did not bring us any lasting settlement. It didn't even provide for the security of the population of Nagorno-Karabakh. We were lied to during the war. Every possible diplomatic mistake was made before the war. During the war, several attempts to stop it were ignored. Our leadership lied to us. Our media lied to us. And then this shameful document was signed. And we had this rude awakening, and we found out that we capitulated. But this was just the first stage of it. Azerbaijan is getting the upper hand. They're getting stronger and stronger. They're getting more and more aggressive. Turkey is getting more aggressive. Russia is getting weaker and more dependent on Turkey, which is the last thing we wanted. And any attempt by Iran to help us is now being thwarted by the United States that proclaimed that it's not going to let it happen. So anything and everything has gone wrong for us, including the fact that we wasted these 2 years and we did nothing to improve our standing diplomatically or militarily or in any other way.
Putting your analyst hat on, I want to understand, and I always ask this question to myself, what Armenia did wrong leading up to the war. We talked a little bit about during the, the issues during the war, but was this a winnable war to begin with even?
Two main reasons. One was a retrospective nationalism, which we had people who came to the forefront here. The elite was dispersed. All the educated people kind of run away. And we had the second so-called elite that came forward, and it espoused the views that Armenians are an ethnic group and not a state. And what we should do is we should constantly talk about our past, live in the past, and behave like an ethnic group instead of building a state. This retrospective nationalism was one of the main reasons why we killed our country, because we refused to look forward, we refused to develop like Turkey did. Don't forget, 30 years ago, Armenia had its nuclear physics. Armenia had its computer technologies, the first in the Soviet Union, one of the first republics in the Soviet Union. We had laser robots 30 years ago. We lost all of it. All of our science, all of our physics, engineers, all of it was just shattered to pieces by this retrospective nationalism. And number two, of course, is corruption. I've been trying to fight this for 30 years, and you saw what happened. The country was incredibly corrupt. It was handled like some kind of a feudal state, divided into little regions with little princes. I mean, prince would be the wrong word to use in this case. So it was a very dysfunctional state. We lost our economy, we lost our science, and we became very weak. And then 4 years ago, we had this group that came to power. The rulers before them, they made many, many mistakes, including corruption and this feudalism. But at least they had some understanding of how to handle foreign policy, how to handle the West, and how to handle Russia. These people came literally from the street. They destroyed our diplomacy. They destroyed our relationship with the US and with Russia. And they led us right to this. And I was warning about it for many years, that this is going to happen. For 4 years, I've been warning about it. No one would listen. There were clear warnings that the war is coming. Your humble servant has done it, and people who have been much more well-known than I did it also. Nobody listened. Russia warned about it. CSTO warned about it. There were warnings coming from the US. After the war of 2016, it was clear the Azeris were going to use more of the same medicine because they saw that it worked. I personally wrote and even contacted the defense ministry to tell them this is what they're going to do. I was then tracked down by the Turkish and Azeri services because I could see that they're all on my website. So it was clear that they found a weak spot in our defenses. They were going to invest in drones, that we needed to do the same. We needed to boost our air defenses. Instead, we were left defenseless. All of our military equipment clearly visible in the field. There were no, usually you have 2 or 3 or 4 layers of defense. There were none, only one. The fortifications were old. Anyway, many, many mistakes were made. So then we came to this. So it's a combination of retrospective nationalism, weak statehood, absence of political leaders, also negative selection of cadres. This is the thing that is killing us. Armenians have a tendency to filter out the good people and keep the bad people. I have no idea why this happens, especially here. It's a negative selection of personnel, of experts, of the expert community, etc. Then, as I said, corruption, and then an incompetent government, and diplomatic failure, followed by military failure.
Right.
So it's a buffet of failures. You can choose whatever you want to discuss in more depth.
Let's talk about the last 2 years. Arthur, some Armenians simply say that this is the hands that we were dealt with and we must play it. And everything that is happening today is the result of our loss in war and can be directly mapped to the November 10 agreement. Do you agree with that?
People who say that are the apologists of this regime, and I know some of them. They would say anything to justify this guy and what he's doing. It's completely wrong. Number one, we lost 2 years. Nothing was done to boost our military. They're only doing it now. These weapons that they're trying to purchase from Iran and India, they're doing it now, which proves it could have been done earlier. But we have lost 2 years. We've lost another 300 soldiers in September, another attack. So it's clear that we could have done this earlier. They're only now getting to it. It's terrible because everyone was telling them that something needs to be done by the army. Instead, they were running around saying it's the era of peace. This is the era of peace. We will live in peace. All these fake promises, all this populism, constant manipulation of the public opinion, of the mob that brought them to power. It's his signature trick. That's what he does. He constantly manipulates people. For 2 years, he was talking about the era of peace. The era of peace never came. It never came. So what they are doing now, they should have done 2 years ago. Nothing was done to fix our relationship with Russia or the West. I don't think Russia right now can save us. Russia is in no position to do it, and it will not do it. It will not even save the population of Karabakh. I don't think so. They are not in position to do it. But something could have been done before this year to fix our relationship relationship with them. Perhaps some agreements could have been made then, reached then. And if Russia is in a condition that it is right now, then some agreement, some diplomatic process should have unfolded in Washington and Brussels, so that instead of declaring Aliyev their strategic partner, they would have chosen a different wording, and they would have pretended that there is such a thing as the population of Karabakh, because no one talks about it. Brussels doesn't talk about it. Macron doesn't talk about it. Pelosi doesn't talk about it. I think you would know better. Frank Pallone, I think his name is. I think he said that the tops we can hope for is cultural autonomy, which would translate into their immediate deportation. These people would disappear. This will be the same autonomy they promised to, Sassoon or Western Armenia. It means a death sentence in the hands of these people. And something should have been done diplomatically with the West, so that we should have had some kind of a treaty by now saying the West guarantees, let's say the US or Europe guarantees Armenia's borders or the safety of the people in Karabakh, and it would not allow any ethnic cleansing or genocide to take place. We have none of it. None of it. We wasted 2 years again because we have completely incompetent people in power. The mistakes made by the previous rulers in no way justify the disaster that we're in right now and all the mistakes that are made by this regime. We have this thing, we keep inventing new principles of world history or law. There is no such thing in law as justifying your crime by the fact that somebody made a mistake before you. There is no such thing. Yes, there were a lot of mistakes made by the second and third president. In no way does that justify the disaster we're in right now and the mistakes made by this regime. We were never in a condition like this under Robert Kocharian or Sir Sarkisian. We were never this broken, this humiliated, this worried about our future with the prospect of another genocide. This has never happened in 100 years. So these ridiculous attempts to justify their incompetence by some mistakes that were made by the previous rulers are completely misplaced.
With that wonderful introduction to our next section, basically Nikol Pashinyan and Ilham Aliyev are battling it out in public statements, with Aliyev threatening Armenians both in Armenia and Artsakh, and Pashinyan accusing Aliyev of preparing a genocide against the Armenians of Artsakh. Unfortunately, the regular ceasefire violations by Azerbaijan escalated and resulted in the wounding of an Armenian serviceman earlier this week. The tensions in earnest escalated this week with Aliyev's speech in occupied Shushi. While the Armenian and Azerbaijani delegations were still in air traveling back from Washington, D.C. last Tuesday, Aliyev's speech was a doozy because it not only threatened Armenia, but also Iran, almost explicitly, or anyone else who would dare to come to Armenia's aid, for that matter. On the Iran front, the backdrop was set by a month of escalatory rhetoric. Last week, both Iran and Azerbaijan recalled their respective ambassadors in response to Iran's overtures towards Armenia and the public reiteration that the integrity of Armenia proper being a red line for Iran. A number of political parties and organizations that had been activated in Baku that were previously in slumber. The Musavat Party, for instance, is threatening to hold a protest action on November 15th in front of the Iranian embassy, which Iranians legitimately fear would trickle to Iran proper. In Shushi, Aliyev essentially said that he always gets what he wants. To quote him, he said, "We will achieve what we want. Everyone knows this, and those who conduct military exercises in support of Armenia on our border should also know this. Nobody can scare us." And as if that was not enough, this battle of words was joined in by the State Department. Spokesperson Ned Price called Iran a threat to the region. I just want to remind that many Armenians, see Iran as the main actor that's stopping Aliyev from marching through Sunik and occupying all of Sunik. This was a worrisome development. And meanwhile, Aliyev later on in a summit in Samarkand publicly complained that 40 million Azerbaijanis living outside of Azerbaijan, veiled reference to Azerbaijanis in Iran, could not learn their mother tongue. We all know that the potential for war is catastrophic for everyone in the region. So can we or should we assume that despite his oversized ego, Aliyev is a rational actor or has rational advisors at least? Or maybe alternatively, how far can these tensions between Iran and Azerbaijan go? Do you think this might result in open warfare?
Aliyev and Azerbaijan have learned a lot from Turkey. They have learned that everything in this world is resolved with force, power, and interests. They have become a realpolitik state, which is why they're winning, and Turkey is winning. And we, as always, have been romantics, and we always try to use words and emotions and resolutions and rallies, which is why we always lose, and that's why they always win. So Azerbaijan knows it has gotten the upper hand. It's very powerful militarily. It's getting more powerful. It's building military bases, airports. It has the support of Turkey. Nothing is being done by the West, by America or Europe to check Azerbaijan's power. Nobody condemned the fact that they resolved this issue by force. No one has imposed any sanctions on them for using mercenaries. No one has said anything about his threats to kill the Armenian population of Karabakh. However, the State Department found the time to say that Iran is the one that is a threat to regional security. So it's clear. It's clear the world that we live in, as 100 years ago, as 200 years ago, it has never changed. Everything is resolved with power and interest, but Armenians are always naive enough to believe promises, principles, declarations, morals, words. This is why we always lose. Now, Iran. It has made some pretty strong statements. It even established a consulate in Sunik. It said that you have nothing to fear. But the truth is, if Iran does anything militarily, Israel, the United States, and possibly Europe will do everything they can to destroy it. And they will support not us, they will support Azerbaijan, which is which is not even a projection. This is what they just said. Actually, I said that 2 days prior to the statement. I was asked this question when giving an interview, and I said, no, they're not going to get involved because Israel and the US and Europe will jump on it to destroy them. And 2 days later, we just got this confirmation. I think it's very, very cynical for the State Department to react to this, but not react to the prospect of ethnic cleansing of the Armenian population with all the influence we're supposed to have in Washington. I don't know how to explain this. But anyway, I think Iran will not do anything militarily. It's only going to be there'll be some political statements. Russia will not do anything militarily. It cannot. It can only pressure Azerbaijan diplomatically and maybe provide some assistance to Armenians. Iran can also help Armenians with, advisors or military materials, but not with regular troops. This is not going to happen. And Aliyev knows that, which is why he's getting more and more aggressive. As for our leader, he has done nothing in the last 4 years or in the last 2 years, even since this horrible ceasefire we've had in November 2020, he has done nothing to strengthen our army. They're only now waking up. Only now. I think it's been like a month ago that they tried to get some weapons from India and Iraq.
Arthur, what caused the wake up suddenly 2 years later that they have to start buying from India or something? In fact, there was one interesting thing that happened. That was the altercation in the media between Pashinyan and other countries that they have been paying the money for acquiring arms, and they were not being supplied. The veiled country was, of course, Russia. So if they have been trying to buy from Russia and Russia has not been selling because perhaps Azerbaijan has been threatening not to help Armenia, can you explain a little bit what may have suddenly brought on this awakening to try and buy from India and Iran?
I think two things. One is the crisis in Ukraine and the fact that Russia is weakened and very possibly cannot sell those weapons to Armenia. It's possible because they're running short of weapons themselves, because of our wonderful friends in the West who are helping Ukraine. I mean, they have their reasons to do it. Ukrainians have their reasons to do what they're doing, and Russians have their own. I blame this on those people who destroyed the security system of Europe and the world with this NATO expansion and dismantling of the arms control system. They are the ones to blame for this. Mm-hmm. But in any event, I think, well, first of all, with this guy who is supposed to be our leader, you can never trust him. He is half crazy. He can say one thing in the morning, he can totally change his mind in the evening. You've seen it. He said a month ago, I'm going to sign an agreement. And then in the evening, he said, I never said such thing. So you can never really take him seriously. But I think what's happening is number one, the peace process is collapsing because Russia is weakened and Russia cannot provide those weapons to Armenia. It's possible. It's possible. They've never said directly it was Russia, but it's possible because Russia is running out of weapons, even for the war in Ukraine, which is much more important to them than we are, sadly. And second of all, Aliyev is very aggressive, and he is putting forward unacceptable requirements. I think maybe this group is still fighting for some kind of a status for Karabakh, and he's completely unwilling to accept it. He's saying it doesn't even exist. Karabakh doesn't exist for me. So I think those two things, the weakening of Russia, crisis in Ukraine, and the collapse of the peace process.
Let's go to Aliyev's threats against Armenia and Russia, for that matter, Aliyev's rhetoric was the toughest to date, where he brought up several points. He said that the deadline for the peacekeepers is mentioned in November 2020 agreement, and basically like as a veiled threat to not renew the presence of the peacekeepers or to request the Russian withdrawal. The backdrop for Aliyev's speech was also some pocket opposition groups in Baku protesting, against Russia's peacekeeping operation. And he also said that, so far he hasn't touched any traffic going through the Lachin corridor, but that their patience is not limitless. Another veiled threat, basically, against the Lachin corridor. And earlier, basically, as if on cue, the Azerbaijani media reported that the Lachin corridor is being used for arms trafficking and also accused Russia of allowing that. Can we say that basically Aliyev did not like what happened in Sochi? Is this his response to Sochi? If not, what is? What is it?
I believe what happened in Sochi is that Russians tried to put in a provision saying that in the future the status of Karabakh may be discussed, and Azeris opposed it. Russia is the only country that's tried to put in some kind of a hope, some kind of a promise that in the future we can still talk about the status for this region. And it got away with it originally 2 years ago. But now, given the war in Ukraine and the weakening Russian position, Azerbaijanis are getting much more aggressive. I'm sure that's the reason why they didn't sign the agreements, because they don't want any status for Karabakh and any guarantees for Karabakh. And given Russia's waning power in the region, they're getting more aggressive. Yes, they will probably not renew the presence of Russian peacekeepers. I think we only have 3 years now, and this government is surely going to waste it. Nothing will be done. So yes, they will not renew it. If not even, they might even ask them to leave earlier. Or even if they stay there, Azeris might still start cleaning the Armenians out of Karabakh, even with Russian peacekeepers there, because they know Russia can't respond right now. Because the entire, quote, civilized West is now, fighting Russia in Ukraine, and we have absolutely no standing in this conflict. We're not important for anybody. No one remembers us. Ursula von der something, she went to Baku in the summer. She told Aliyev that they are their strategic partners. Well, Russia says the same thing, gas and oil. That's how things are done in this world. And the US has not even tried to sanction Turkey for completely ignoring all of its sanctions on Russia. Turkey is Russia's window to the world right now. And no one, Europe or the United States, no one is trying to punish it. So you can see how things work. Turkey and Azerbaijan can get away with murder quite literally, and they will do so.
The ceasefire, which always is being violated, was basically done in a more aggravated manner this week by Azerbaijan. As we know, Azerbaijani forces shot and wounded an Armenian soldier inside Armenia on the eastern border of Armenia. And in Artsakh, they also wounded a civilian who was working on his field in tractor, I believe. I understand that EU monitors are supposed to be deployed already. So where are they? The wounding of the Armenian soldier, to repeat, happened in Armenia. And just as a reminder, when asked about this on Hamek, the public TV channel, in an interview he recently had, Pashinyan basically said that monitoring the ceasefire is not actually the goal of the EU monitors. But when you look at the declared statement from the EU monitors, it was posted as as a question and answers on the EU website, it basically explicitly says that they are there to monitor ceasefire violations. But we haven't seen any report from the EU monitoring mission. Or venture to guess why?
Okay, 4 things I want to say before I forget. For things that you mentioned. One, Pashinyan's speeches. He's become quite hysterical recently. He tends to do that. I think it shows that the peace process has been unraveling, and they couldn't get what they wanted in Moscow or Washington.
And by the way, I have a lot of more detailed questions about his speeches next.
Right. Another issue we have been forgetting is the corridor, the Zangezur corridor, which they want. And they will get it, and they will force their way through it, and then they will deploy their troops there. You watch them, because no one's going to stop them. Number 3, European observers. I have said this for many, many years, especially, and sadly, no one listens to me here or in the diaspora. is that Europe or the United States do not have vital interest in Armenia. They're not going to protect Armenia. And putting their observers there may only have a symbolic, political, or moral effect. Not even that. You're absolutely right, and I'm glad you brought this up.
We're not even getting that.
Yeah, we're not even getting that. They came here and they left. I think they already may have left. Or they
are deployed by various various accounts. They're still deployed, and they're now deployed for the 2-month mission.
Very good. I'm very glad you said that. I'm going to use this point in my future interviews because it's an excellent point. I have been saying this. The only thing they can do, the European observers, if they're deployed in Karabakh or here, they can call Brussels and say, things have not been going well. There's a violating the ceasefire, but nothing is going to follow. They have no teeth. There's no real power behind them, and there's no real interest behind them. So this is the proof. I mean, you just mentioned it yourself. Europe has done nothing. The West has done nothing. Instead, they have been criticizing Iran. They do what is in their interest, and they have no interest here. For some reason, Armenians, I've said this in one of my previous interviews, we have a tendency, myself included, we educate ourselves in a Western way. We live in Western culture, but we live in the East. We have this bipolar thing going on in each one of us, including myself. We love Europe, we love America, but we don't want to understand that those countries are not going to come to our help. They don't have vital interests here on our side. Their interests are on Turkey's side. We cannot reconcile it. We cannot understand it, which is why we still believe that Europe is going to send its observers and somehow magically they're going to protect us or the people in Karabakh. They did not. I've been saying this for 30 years, and people in diaspora have been calling me a commie because I kept telling them, please, get this Western myth out of your head. Get this fairy tale out of your head. Start thinking clearly. No one would listen to me. Here it is. You said it yourself. They're here. Our soldiers are being killed. They do nothing. Europe does nothing. There's not a single, and nor does Russia. Nobody, because now even Russia doesn't want to protect us. It wants nothing to do with us. They see this conflict. Russians see this conflict as a Western diversion, as a Western instigated war that is designed just to weaken Russia even more. So they're not going to get involved. They're not, and they can't.
No, they see it as a second front, at least.
Exactly. I've been saying it for years, and no one would listen. It's kind of frustrating.
Well, I haven't heard from you directly, but we have been in agreement about these things, I think.
Yeah, I'm not a famous person, and I don't want to be, but it's frustrating when people don't listen when you're warning them about things happening, and then you see them happening.
So let's talk about Pashinyan's 2 public speeches. I want to warn our listeners because many may think this is boring. It has, been done before and so forth. But I do think there were some eyebrow-raising segments of the speech, and if Arthur, you've listened to it, or if you've maybe read analyses, I'd like to understand and digest what is going on. The main thing I noted was, for the first time in 2 years, Pashinyan started talking back to Azerbaijan, in a way that I sort of hoped that it would happen, all this time. But I don't know if it's good or not, because as you said, Pashinyan's rhetoric is all over the place. And the last time I felt like, he talked back like this was shortly before the, 44-day war. So there are 2 things. One was the November 10 speech, which was 30 minutes. It was, I think, during the government session. And he responded to Aliyev in an unusually direct manner, saying that Azerbaijan is preparing a genocide against Artsakh. He repeated that Armenia has not agreed to give a sovereign corridor through Armenia, and that the route for the newly built road through Armenia must be based on agreements from both sides. He even brought up the issue of the POWs. Then he had a follow-up Q&A. It was a self-interview almost on the public TV channel, where he went into more depth on those things. And for the first time, I heard him mention that Armenia wants guarantees, for some kind of guarantees for peace. And he basically said that, if there are no guarantees for peace, then war may start within 12 hours of signing the peace treaty, which is interesting because, I thought that should have been something that, we should have known already. The other thing that he said, the other thing he mentioned during the public TV interview was that with the permission of Artsakh's leadership, he has proposed that if Azerbaijan demilitarizes around the area of Artsakh, then Artsakh Defense army may also be downgraded. I don't think he implied full demilitarization, but it was still eyebrow raising. So some questions. Where is Nico's promised era of peace? If the situation is so dire, does that mean that basically all those concessions on land that he made, I'm thinking of the Goris-Kapan highway, which he said was done in the interest of peace, were done for naught?
Oh, I would love to answer that, because he finally repeated all the points I made in my interview about 10 days ago. I've given I think 7 or 8 interviews. These are the points I was raising. Who is going to guarantee our border? Who is going to guarantee the security of Artsakh people? The peace treaty by itself cannot do it. If the West makes us sign it, if Russia leaves, what guarantees do we have from the West? What military mechanisms will there be in place to protect us against this invasion? I said that we're facing genocide. Who is going to speak up for us? Is the West concerned at all that we're going to have another Bosnia or another Kosovo here? They don't seem to be at all. They don't even notice it. Instead, we're busy running behind Ms. Pelosi and listening to Macron and getting, wiped off our feet by his beautiful French. And then in the end, we found out there was nothing behind it. And I tried to explain this every day, and no one would listen. As for this guy, I can't listen to him speak because it's very, very disturbing for me to hear this guy. I only heard bits and pieces of it. Yes, Aliyev has been threatening genocide. We know that. Why did you wake up today? You used to call him constructive and educated. Yes, he's now threatening the whole of Armenia. He's saying we can clearly see Sevan, Zangezur. We can see he's naming all the cities that they're going to strike. He's doing this openly. They finally woke up, finally spoke up against this. Instead, they were telling us about the era of peace, which again failed. Everything these people do fails, and they're still in power. As for this guy, he doesn't have any education experience, and he has demonstrated his complete inability to run a country and diplomacy. He's a failed journalist. He hasn't even graduated from college. He has been expelled from the university. You know that. All he could do was write articles that he was paid for to slander people. That's what he was known for. And this is our leader. And this is the group that governs us. And no one would take to the streets. I mean, the opposition is even more ridiculous than they are. Well, not more, but like second most ridiculous thing is these oppositional rallies. The same people go there. Most people ignore them, and they start walking around the city. And the same leaders go there, and the same methods are used, and it doesn't work, and they don't want to change. So it's a disaster. He's a disaster. He has ruined everything that we've had. And now finally he woke up, and instead of calling Aliyev constructive, intelligent, the guy he could do business with, instead of saying area of peace, we're going to talk directly to the Azeri people, all these delusional ideas. And we were trying to warn him against it, and no one would listen. This group listens to no one. Not just this guy, all of his advisors, this entire team, they listen to no one. It's like they're members of a cult. It's like a religious cult, if not foreign agents. It's one of the two.
So one thing that got me a little bit worried was, how prior to the 44-day war, Pashinyan made some statements that were sort of really, people would say, were unachievable. For instance, he said, he demands that Artsakh be reintroduced into the negotiation process, which was essentially a guarantee that
never going to happen.
It's never going to happen, and basically the alternative was, war for Azerbaijan. Now he's talking about peacekeepers. He's saying that without that, then there is sort of he almost implied that there is no chance of signing a peace treaty. Is this another one of those impossible to achieve goals that could potentially derail this process?
Absolutely. The Azeris are not going to hear of it. They don't accept any kind of international presence there. They only accepted Russians, but they won't even accept them soon enough. They have never accepted any kind of international mission in Karabakh, any peacekeepers. He's saying things he knows will be rejected. It's like he's delusional. He's just trying to drag this out. The Azeris know that Armenia is stuck. We're cornered. Our only real ally, Russia, is too weak to help us. Our so-called allies in the West and America don't care. They don't even notice us. They're busy, protecting Ukraine. You know how much military aid went into Ukraine? I think more than $100 billion. $100 billion was given to Ukraine. Look at how much was given to us. Nothing. Look how many statements were made saying that it's unacceptable to change borders of countries. Just today, we heard them from the G20 meeting. You cannot change any international borders by force. Can you exterminate an ethnic minority? Can you? Well, apparently you can if nobody cares, because they have no interest here. So this guy, he keeps saying impossible things. Of course, they're not going to accept peacekeepers. Of course, they're not going to accept this demilitarized zone. They know they're at the peak of their power. They're not going to accept anything. We're lucky if we keep Zangezur the way things are going. We might even lose the southern province of Armenia. We might lose Kapan and Goris and Meri. We might very soon lose them, because I don't see anybody coming in and helping us. And the military advantage that the Azeris and Turks have is overwhelming. So that's the situation we're in.
Did you catch that part about him inviting Turkish border guards to guard the Azeri side of the roads?
I did, and that's why I'm saying he's crazy. This guy is crazy. It's insane. It's insane, because that's like showing Turkey a way to seize Sunik. This is how they're going to do it.
So, Arthur, before you go on, let me provide some more background for our listeners. Pashinyan said something odd that wasn't covered in the press that much. In his address to the Civil Contract Party during its annual Congress, and reconfirmed during his interview with the public TV station, he said that one of the elements of discussion around opening communication routes is which country's border guards would be in charge of the Armenian portion. He mentioned that Azerbaijan wants Russian border guards, and they do not want to see any Armenian guards as they zip through their so-called corridor through Armenia. He said that this is against the principle of parity that was agreed upon between two parties. And if that is the case, then Armenians should demand to not see any Azerbaijanis as they go through Azerbaijan on its roads. And I believe he made a reference to basically going through Nakhichevan, through the railroad in Nakhichevan, and maybe even by trucks. So, he did not stop there, which would have been just great. No, he continued, and this is where we're coming to. Basically, he said that Azerbaijan could choose any third country, to guard the roads for Armenians as they travel through it. And he said that Azerbaijan could even ask Turkish border guards to guard the roads in Azerbaijan, since Armenians have experienced seeing Turkish border guards.
He should have mentioned Iran.
Well, yes, but as an Armenian, I don't know which I should be considered worried more, that he's basically inviting Turkey to come to Azerbaijan and set up more military boots on the ground, or the fact that he thinks Turkey, who has participated in this war against us, would be an acceptable, counterweight to Azerbaijan.
Which is why I'm saying that this guy is mentally unstable. I'm not saying this as an offensive thing. He does have some cognitive problems. I remember him screaming after the failure in this war, the horrible agreement of November 2020. He's been screaming, half drunk, saying, the time has come for vengeance, citizens' vengeance, screaming from some, I don't know, it was in a basement of some building. This guy is mentally unstable. He doesn't know what he's doing. And that most of the Armenian people don't even support him anymore. They're just too tired, apathetic, and they just have resigned to it. Most people do not even support him anymore. But these suggestions to bring Turkey in, I think he's just trying to delay the inevitable. He's just trying to delay it by coming up with some ridiculous proposals just to drag it, just to drag this out as much as possible. And in one of the recordings that Serge Sarkisian published, he was saying, "Oh, I'm just going to play crazy." He told his team members, "I'm just going to play crazy." I think he continues to believe that these ravings, these words, these rhetoric, he's confusing the Turks and the Azeris with the Armenian mob. I don't mean that all Armenians are part of a mob, but the mob that brought him to power, that's how he got them excited, by words, by screaming, by shaking his finger. He doesn't understand that, yes, he could get away with populism in Armenia, but he can't get away with it in Turkey and Azerbaijan, because those people are not romantic populists. Those are realpolitik people, and they know what works in this world. He does not understand it. These are ravings. This guy is insane, and he should be removed, but no one does that, and the opposition can't seem to do it.
Let's wrap up our topics here. I'd like to ask each of you if there's been something on your mind this past week that you want to talk about. Arthur, what's on your mind?
I want to establish the Church of the Holy Brain, and I want God to send us the manual so we can start using our heads. Because when I look around me, it's just desperation. It's desperation. And not just in Armenia, it's all over the world. The world is becoming more and more irrational. So, I hope that one day Armenians in Armenian diaspora start to think better, think with their heads.
Okay. Hovik, something on your mind?
I will skip this time.
All right. Bye-bye. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye. Bye.
And now we go to Artsakh to have a discussion with our special guest, Gev Iskajyan, who is the ANC representative in Stepanakert. Hi, Gev. Welcome.
Good
Hi,
to
Gev.
be on. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, Gev, we're recording this discussion on November 14, 2022. I'm in Yerevan, Asbed is in Glendale, and you're in Stepanakert. But we really like to learn how it feels to be in Artsakh at this time, 2 years after the November 2020 trilateral statement. How are Artsakh citizens processing what has transpired over the last 2 years?
So I would say that, look, the first 2 years were obviously, as everybody knows, tough, especially following post-war. We're dealing with one, displacement on a mass scale, tens of thousands of people. You're dealing with the trauma of war that many families are facing, whether it's a lost loved one, a brother, a father, and so many families have been impacted to that. And that bleeds on to the personal level, but also larger societal level. If you walk around Stepanakert or any part of Artsakh today, it's very hard to come across a family that hasn't been personally impacted by loss and by war. That being said, I've been here for a year so far, and I would say especially the last few months have genuinely given me hope. Today, when I walk around Stepanakert, when I walk around Artsakh, I see a couple of things that I think are really important to note for the diaspora and for the larger Armenian nation. The first and foremost is that Artsakh is not this place that's withering away. So we had, post-war, we had about 30 to 40,000 people that were displaced, folks that had moved to Yerevan, moved outside of Artsakh.
I meant to ask you about that. Are those
Yeah.
mostly from Hadrut and other occupied areas that are currently sort of still occupied?
Yeah, so the big bulk of it, statistically speaking, are from Hadrut and Shushi, but there are also some on Ameret Kuret that were evacuated. So you've got those communities, whether it's communities near Marduni, Mardager that may have been evacuated, or places that were recently evacuated, like Aghavno. So, it's a mixed bag, but yes, the large majority were from, Hadrut and Shushi. Today, however, as I mentioned earlier, there was about 30 to 40,000 people displaced, and many of those folks were out of the country. Today, only about 10,000 are outside of Artsakh. Many of them have moved back, which is a positive note for us.
And that is great to hear.
Yes, and we want that number to be lowered. But with that comes a lot of work that needs to be done. So when we're talking about housing and infrastructure, that capacity needs to be built here. So Stepanakert is quite impacted. To find a house, to get a place with all these people coming in has been quite difficult. And today you can see around us that there are lots of construction projects. We see apartment buildings going up at a very high rate, and that is to satisfy the needs of those communities. I would also say in the last 2-3 months, I've seen a noticeable uptick just walking around in the streets. We have traffic now, which is a good thing. In most places, traffic is a bad thing. Here, I see it as a positive development because we've got people in the country, So I think that, look, the last 2 years have been very tough, but the last few months of the whole time that I've been here has given me real solid hope.
Gev, how has Artsakh's economy evolved since the end of the war? How are people earning their income?
So post-war, the economy, I have to be very frank with you guys, was absolutely devastated. We're talking about whether it's one of the large exports that we have, which was grain. We lost a lot of that land that was producing that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to reconfigure what this economy produces, and that some of that takes time, some of that takes new investment. There are lots of investors previously that had put money into many projects. For example, we had an electrical grid here, right? We had over 9 electrical grids here. We lost so many of them. Today, only 3 are under our control.
Right.
And we used to produce so much electricity here that we would export that out there as well. So all of those major exports, whether it was grain or electricity, are kind of gone. And we have to redevelop what we need to do here in terms of gross domestic product. That being said, this year, compared to the year over last year, we've seen, and I've confirmed this number with the folks in the government here, we've seen a 12% growth in the economy, which is great. I mean, we want much higher if it's compared to the loss that we've sustained. But one, we don't have stagnation. We don't have a lowering, but we're seeing a net increase, which, again, it's something that can be built on. And, I can't give an answer of, where that economic output is going to be redirected now, because we're in the process of figuring it out. There's lots of things that we want to try. Some of that has to do with like agricultural goods that are being produced. Some of that has to do with domestic products, handcraft and such that's being produced here. But again, unfortunately, we don't have those mass exports or those higher quantity exports yet.
So 2 weeks ago, I was in Renaissance Square. The square was full, and I believe over a third of the population of Artsakh was there. And they were there, again, to tell the world that they're not going to be subjects of geopolitical borders, that their rights of self-determination and to be part of the Armenian nation, to live on their historic land, are inalienable. In your opinion, who do you believe was the political addressee of that statement in Stepanakert? Who do you think they were talking to?
So I think it's important to see this. A lot of folks saw it as a protest, and in many regards it was. But there's another angle to this too. I think it was a reaffirmation of statehood. It's to show that Artsakh has a strong Armenian populace, because the narratives that are coming out from Azerbaijan or other parts of the world is that it's a dwindling population, that they can't self-sustain, that they need, this narrative that they need to be in Azerbaijan's gauze or within their, boundaries to survive. That's not true. You see that expressed through the will of the people. You see them come out in large numbers to say, look, we're here. And in fact, our population numbers are growing too. And, one thing that's also really important to note, in the last 2 years, a lot of the news that has come out about Artsakh has been different geopolitical players speaking for Artsakh, whether sometimes it's the Armenian government, whether it's folks in the West and the EU saying what Artsakh should do, whether it's folks in, Moscow saying what Artsakh should do. I think the last week was a reaffirmation of what Artsakhi's want. And that's a narrative that we don't focus on enough. And I think that was the strongest statement of all of this. And lastly, I think they're saying that, look, a lot of these negotiations that are going on, these separate meetings that are going on, that are being held on behalf of, larger powers, we need to refocus that the driver of, those conversations has to be the people of Artsakh. It has to be rooted and born here, because these are the folks whose future is going to be impacted. These are the folks who are going to live under whatever decisions come about. And I think more than anything, it was them coming out to the streets and saying, we are going to be a participant in our future, and our destiny is not going to be dictated by external factors.
And sometimes we are guilty of not covering this narrative ourselves, because we always focus on the geopolitical games around Artsakh. So yeah, I appreciate you coming on to set the record straight. The entire Artsakh conflict began with the protests in the late 80s. It seems like, the entire population of Armenia at that time was out on the streets. It was still the Soviet Union. And I remember it as a child, or as a almost teen. I remember participating in the protests, and I also remember visiting as a family our neighbors' homes to read the latest news about what's coming from Stepanakert or the world about Artsakh, often self-published and handed down from one person to another, and we basically read secretly. So I was thinking about that as I attended the protest in Yerevan. The turnout of the Yerevan version of the protests was pretty low in comparison. I mean, we all have to admit that. Of course, I don't mean to compare the situation in 1988 with what's happening now. There are a lot of things that are not the same. But also the organizers of the protest sort of did try to make that link. And if they did, then I don't know if that was successful. But what do you think needs to be done more in order for this message that you just talked about to be sent louder and clearer to the rest of the world and to Armenia proper itself, and also to instill some confidence in Artsaksis that the Armenian nation is behind them and that they're not going to abandon them?
So I think that lots of times we get, caught up in the numbers, and that's important too. You want to have popular support. You want to have solidarity amongst the Armenian nation with the people of Artsakh. But one thing I've learned in the last year that I've been here is that maybe the masses in the streets of Yerevan aren't going to come out for Artsakh, unfortunately, right? But there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people from Armenia that are committed, that see Artsakh as the frontier of the Armenian nation. As
you only need to look at the surveys where say 90% of the people say that Artsakh self-determination is important, and they don't see Artsakh as part of Azerbaijan. Yeah, but I would just sort of maybe it's a challenging question to ask.
I mean, it's worthwhile. It's worthwhile to ask. And look, it's good to hear that the vast majority of Armenians see Artsakh as ideally a part of the Armenian nation, as they should. But I also think that regardless of what those numbers are, regardless of how many people show up to those protests, the people that are genuinely and truly dedicated to this land have to commit themselves. The Armenian government, I'll be very frank about that, on many levels, to a certain degree, has abandoned this place. If we're talking about in terms of security, if we're talking about in terms of the deployment of the army, in terms of a lot of other factors, and even in the negotiation process, we've seen that there has been negligence, to say the least, and abandonment to, kind of more clearly clarify. But that doesn't, we do have to separate the intentions and the actions of the Armenian government with that of the Armenian nation, with the people of Armenia, with the people of the diaspora. And that's where my hope is, that the folks that see a future in Artsakh, I would hope that they would be committing themselves to this nation.
It's an existential issue, right? What is the Armenian nation worth if it cannot safeguard the security of Artsakh? I'll put it out there. I mean, I think everyone needs to think about it. Yes, we can ensure our physical survival individually as individuals, but there needs to be something more higher values that we need to reach out for.
Yes, and I think we have to ask, where does the bleeding stop, right? For those pacifists that think that if only we give Artsakh, the Armenian nation will see peace and calm and all that stuff, I'm not a believer in that narrative. And I think we've seen that transpire into action over the last year or so, because lots of people in Artsakh were saying that, look, you guys are so willingly and nonchalantly, letting go of claims to Artsakh, they're going to come for Sunik next. And what have we spent the last year covering? What has the last aggression and incursions into Armenia been into Sunik? And I think one last point I would say, where they've launched those attacks has been through a lot of the areas that they've occupied post-Artsakh war. So it was never just about Artsakh. It was always about taking as much as they can. And Artsakh has to be a stand. Artsakh has to be a statement for the Armenian nation.
So given all this, you moved to Artsakh about a year ago, like you said, from Los Angeles, my neck of the woods. Tell us a little bit about what motivated you to do that. And also, I want to hear if you would call on Diaspora Youth to actually follow your example and move to Artsakh and participate in life over there.
So I was deeply impacted by the war in 2020, and looking at my homeland. I always thought that there's going to be a time where I look back on this time frame in our history and ask myself what I did. And being away from what we love, from our nation, from what we advocate for in the diaspora. I grew up in the ANCA family of organizations. My background is in political science, international relations, and I wanted to know which ways adequate to my skill sets and my knowledge base, can I help out my nation? And, the ANC office that we opened up here in Artsakh was a natural transition for me, where I thought that I can bring my skill sets. And actually, one of the things that I'm very passionate about and what we work on here in our ANC Artsakh office is we bring young professionals through internship programs over the summer and throughout the year, young professionals that have just recently graduated college that bring their skill sets. They work with certain ministries in the government. In turn, they learn about governance here.
How many of them did you have this past summer?
This past summer, we had 5 actually, which was great.
Great.
And we had folks from different parts of the world. We had folks from the East Coast, West Coast. We had interns from Canada, interns from Moscow, interns from France. So it was a good combination of our young diasporan youth, and leaving, they were sad, which made me happy in a sense, because they've built this, beyond all that, professional stuff where they come and they help out, they bring their skill sets. We become a bridge between the homeland and the diaspora, and I think those things last a lifetime. I think these young folks that have come spend time here in the summer, Artsakh is always going to be a part of their life, whether they visit all the time or whether they decide to come and move here. And I don't know if it's really easy for me to sit here and say, everyone come to Artsakh and move here and blah blah blah. Everyone's situations are different. However, everybody has a certain skill set. Everybody has something they're really good at. Everybody has something that they can contribute. And I would say find what it is that you can bring to this nation, whether it's temporarily, whether it's permanently, but dedicate yourself to it. There's lots of things that folks can even do from the diaspora for Artsakh, right? Just like you guys are doing, I think, shedding light on these narratives, giving voice to, folks like us here on the ground, that is a net benefit. And the more people that we have doing that, and then the more people we have doing various things, we build critical mass around this movement, around the recognition of Artsakh, around the long-term viability of the future of this nation.
Wow, those are some powerful words, Gev. Thank you very much for being our guest, and we hope this is not your last time. So come back frequently.
This is the first time, hopefully the first of many.
I really enjoyed being on, guys, and I can tell you that, from here listening to you guys, what you do and the work that you guys carry out is pivotal, because these narratives aren't spoken about very often. And the light that you guys shed on these issues is very important. So thank you guys for having me on. I wish you guys the best of luck.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gev.
Talk to you soon.
Take care, guys.
That concludes our program for this Week in Review episode. We hope it has helped your understanding of some of the issues from the previous week. We look forward to your feedback and your suggestions for issues to cover in greater depth. Contact us on our website at groong.org, or on our Facebook page ANN-Groong, or in our Facebook group Groong-Armenian News Network. Special thanks to Laura Osborne for providing the music for our podcast. On behalf of everyone in this episode, we wish you a good week. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels, like our pages, and follow us on social media. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.